Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's Patch Tuesday webinar by Manage Engine. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for taking time off your busy schedules and joining in. Here's a quick intro about me. I'm Anupam Kundu, a product specialist at Manage Engine. Today, I'll be your presenter, and I would like to say that I'm also assisted by an expert panel who would be answering all your queries. So if you have any queries or questions regarding the webinar, the presentation, or any of our products, please feel free to ask. Also, this is going to be a quick 45-minute session followed by a question and an answer session. I would like to tell you that the webinar is being recorded and the recordings along with the presentation's slide deck will be sent to your registered email IDs in 1 to 2 working days. You can also replay the webinar in Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday page within 1 to 2 working days. Okay, so let's move on with the agenda of today's webinar. As usual, first up, we'll have a discussion about the latest cybersecurity news that made the headlines. Followed by this, we'll have a detailed breakdown of this month's Patch Tuesday updates by Microsoft. After that, we'll be discussing the impacts and effects that missing these patches can have on the vulnerable systems. And then we'll share some of the best practices for patch management that you can use to secure hybrid networks. And last but not the least, we'll have a question and answer session wherein our expert panel would be answering all your queries regarding the webinar, the presentation, or any of our products. Okay, so let's begin today's webinar. The need for cybersecurity requires no introduction. With rising cyber attacks being a constant, admins have no choice but to be vigilant at all times. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the top cybersecurity news that made the headlines from across the world. First up, we have a 0 days. We have 2 0 days in Microsoft Exchange Server. Now, Microsoft has acknowledged these 2 0 days in the Exchange Server. However, fixes haven't been released yet. So in late September, GTSC, a Vietnamese cybersecurity company, had reported 2 0 days in the Microsoft Exchange Server. Now, the vulnerabilities have been tracked as CVE 2022-41040 with a CVSS score of 8.8 and CVE 2022-41082 with a CVSS score of 6.3. I would repeat, the vulnerabilities have been assigned CVSS scores of 8.8 and 6.3 respectively. Now, as per experts, these vulnerabilities can cause elevation of privilege through server-side request forgery, that is SSRF attacks, and remote code execution only when PowerShell is accessible to the attacker. Speaking of the fixes, as I mentioned earlier, as of now, no fixes have been released. However, Microsoft is aware of these vulnerabilities and the targeted attacks that have been caused due to it, and they have released steps for mitigation. Now you can refer to the link shared in the chat for the mitigation steps. Moving on to the next news item, we have BlackByte ransomware that's leveraging Windows driver vulnerabilities to disable critical drivers. Now, what's this BlackByte? So speaking of the BlackByte ransomware, this is a new ransomware group that has been linked to multiple US, European, and Australian cyber attacks since the July of 2020. Now, these attacks range from critical infrastructure providers to manufacturing as well as financial services. So why is this in the news? Now, recently, BlackByte has leveraged a new attack technique that is BYOVD, which is the acronym for Bring Your Own Vulnerable Driver. And this involves threat actors abusing vulnerabilities in legitimate signed drivers to achieve successful kernel mode exploitation. And finally, they can seize control of the compromised machines. Now, speaking of the recent attack, BlackByte has taken advantage of affecting the MicroStar MSI Afterburner Artico64.sys driver. You can see the driver right here on the screen. And this driver has been, the vulnerability in this driver has been leveraged to disable security products. Now, this bug can cause privilege escalation and remote code execution and has been assigned a CVSS score of 7.8. Now, if you speak about mitigation, so in order to protect against these BYOVD or bring your own vulnerable driver attacks, it's highly recommended to keep a track of the drivers installed on the systems and ensure they are up to date. In addition, as an additional security step, you can also blacklist or blocklist those drivers that are known to be exploitable. So you're done with the news item with the latest cybersecurity news. Now let's take a look at the Microsoft support and Windows lifecycle. So folks, as you can see on your screens, the active support and security support for Windows 10 version 21H1 and Windows 10 version 1909 had ended on the 10th of May 2022. So users who are still on these versions can consider migrating to newer versions such as Windows 10 version 21H1 and Windows 11 version 22H2. So as we all know that Windows 11 version 22H2 was released on October 11th of this year. And also Microsoft has hinted the release of Windows 10 version 22H2 at the later half of this year. Let's take a look at the 0 days patched this month in this month's patch Tuesday. So we can see a total of 2 0-day vulnerabilities have been patched, starting with the first vulnerability in Windows COM Plus Event System Service. Now, this vulnerability has been tracked as CVE 2022-41003-41033. I repeat, CVE 2022-41033 and is being actively exploited. Now, this vulnerability can cause elevation of privilege and has been assigned a CVSS score of 7.8. Now, by executing a specially crafted program, an attacker could exploit this vulnerability to execute arbitrary code with higher privileges. As per Microsoft, an attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could gain system privileges. Moving on to the next vulnerability, next 0 day vulnerability in Microsoft Office. We have it. We have a vulnerability that is being publicly disclosed. However, no reports of active exploitation in the wild have been found yet. Also, this has been tracked as CVE 2022-41043 and has a CVS score of 3.8, 3.3. So this vulnerability can cause information disclosure in the exploited systems. And Microsoft says that attackers would use this vulnerability to gain access to users' authentication tokens. Moving on to the list of the critical vulnerabilities. So we see that in October 2022, out of the 84 vulnerabilities that Microsoft patched, out of those 84, 13 are critical vulnerabilities. Out of these 13 critical vulnerabilities, we have 6 critical ones in Windows Server 2012 R2 and 2 in Windows Server 2016. The rest can be found in Azure and Windows 10 and so on. I'll pause for a while so that you can take a note or a screenshot of this. We have vulnerabilities in Windows Server 2012 R2 causing remote code execution and spoofing. Also, ladies and gentlemen, do note that all of this information is available in Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday forum post. Moving on to the next list, we see 2 other 0 critical vulnerabilities in Windows Server 2012 R2, while one in Server 2016 and Server 2008 R2. All of these can cause remote code execution when exploited. And finally, we have the list of the 4 other critical vulnerabilities. However, kindly note that the CVE 2022-37968, that is the critical vulnerability in Azure Stackage, has been assigned a CVSS score of 10.2. So this is an ultra critical vulnerability which can cause elevation of privilege. I repeat that the Azure Stackage 0-day vulnerability, Azure Stackage critical vulnerability with the CVE ID CVE 2022-37968 has been assigned a CVSS score of 10.0 and can cause elevation of privilege. Also, this allows unauthenticated users to gain admin controls. Hence, it is highly recommended to patch this as soon as possible. Now let's take a look at the Patch Tuesday breakdown for October 2022. We can see that 84 vulnerabilities in total were remediated via 89 patches. And if left unpatched, these 84 vulnerabilities can have 6 different kinds of impact on the exploited systems. Taking a look at the operating system and applications affected by these vulnerabilities, we say 3 vulnerabilities in Azure, 2 in developer tools, 18 in Microsoft Edge, while 9 in Microsoft Office. Microsoft Visual Studio has 3, while System Center has just 2. And a whopping 67 vulnerabilities, out of which 10 vulnerabilities have been marked as critical in Microsoft Windows, in the Windows family. We'll discuss about the critical vulnerabilities found in the Windows family later. Let's now take a look at the patches by impact. So as I already mentioned, if left unpatched, these vulnerabilities can have 6 different forms of impact on the vulnerable systems. Starting with denial of service and elevation of privilege, we can see 41 vulnerabilities can cause elevation of privilege, while the rest can cause RCE, that is remote code execution, information disclosure, spoofing, and security feature bypass. Now, coming to the patches by severity, we see that this time only important and critical patches have been rolled out, and there's no patches with low severity. Speaking of the breakdown, we see 14.9% of these patches are critical, while 85.1% of these are important. So for admins out there, there's no time to be lost. It's highly recommended that the patches are installed as soon as possible. Let's have a detailed look at the operating system and applications patched. We'll begin with Microsoft Azure. We see 3 different CVEIDs, 3 different vulnerabilities in Microsoft Azure, and these can have elevation of privilege and spoofing as their impact. One of the vulnerabilities that has been highlighted, that is CVE 2022-37968, has been marked as critical. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been assigned a CVS score of 10.2. Moving on to the Microsoft Office vulnerabilities, we see critical and important ones here that can cause RCE, spoofing, and information disclosure. Here's a look at the CVEIDs, pausing for a while so that you can take a screenshot of it. CVE 2022-38048 that has been highlighted is a critical vulnerability. Moving on to Microsoft Visual Studio, luckily we have just 3 vulnerabilities which have been marked as important and can cause elevation of privilege, information disclosure, and RCE. And there are no critical vulnerabilities in Visual Studio. For System Center, we have 1 vulnerability that has been rated as important and can cause elevation of privilege and has been tracked as CVE 2022-37971. For Microsoft Windows, as I mentioned earlier, there are a total of 67 vulnerabilities this time, with 10 being critical. And these vulnerabilities, if left unpatched, can cause RCE, denial of service, information disclosure, spoofing, elevation of privilege, as well as security feature bypass. Let's have a look at the CVIDs for the Windows family. So ladies and gentlemen, the ones that have been highlighted in red are the ones that are critical. Pausing for a while so that you can make a note. Also, please note that all of this information, along with the third-party updates that have been launched, that have been released this month, are available on Manage Engines Patch Tuesday forum. Here's a list of the other vulnerabilities of the other CVIDs for Windows family this time. And CVE 2022-37979 and 41081 are the critical ones. Finally, we come to the end of the list where we can see 2 vulnerabilities out of the 7 have been marked as critical, starting with CVE 2022-38000 and 38047. For developer tools, we have 2 vulnerabilities that have been marked as important and can cause elevation of privilege. And now we take a look at the third-party updates that were released this Patch Tuesday. So for Windows, we see updates from some major vendors such as Adobe and Google Chrome. You can take a note of it, or you can refer to Manage Engines Patch Tuesday forum post, which has all the information. We have some other updates here from Cloudflare, WebEx, Cisco, as well as Zoom. Taking a look at the third-party updates released for Mac, we see updates from Google Chrome, as well as Microsoft and Zoom yet again. We have Adobe in the list as well. Again, if you want to have the entire information, you can refer to Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday forum post. For the non-security Office updates, we have seen updates released only for two applications, that is Microsoft Office 2013 and 16, and here are their respective KB versions, KB numbers. Now, dear folks, we're glad to announce that out of all the patches released in October 2022, Manage Engine's Patch Management Solutions, that is Endpoint Central, Patch Manager Plus, and Vulnerability Manager Plus, supports entirely 548 patches. So you can seamlessly deploy these 548 patches using our patch management solutions without any effort. We'll have a detailed demo of how to deploy the patches using our flagship patch management solution, that is Patch Manager Plus, later in the webinar. Now, from the graph on your screen, it's clearly depicted that the steep rise in vulnerabilities each year. So as we can see, a total of 19,500 vulnerabilities, 19.5K vulnerabilities have been reported till October 2020. Now, such an alarming rise in vulnerabilities only iterates the dire need for patching to protect the endpoints in a network. So with that being said, let's have a look at the best practices for patching in a hybrid network. Starting with the testing and approval patches. So as a thumb rule, always test the patches before deploying them to your production machines. Now, what is this testing of patches and how do you configure a test group? So a test group, always remember that a test group should have all the flavors and versions of the operating systems that are used in your network. So once the patches have been deployed to the test groups and have been approved, only then are they safe to be rolled to the production machines. This has to be done to prevent any productivity drops or any unnecessary faults in the systems due to faulty patches. Next up, always prioritize the deployment of critical updates and security updates for all the machines. Other less severe updates, that is severity consisting of medium to low, or feature packs, quality rollups, monthly rollups, they can be deployed to the systems based on the normal deployment schedules. Third, we come across the synchronizing of patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesdays. So what is this synchronizing of patching schedules with monthly patch Tuesdays? Now, there are two ways to achieve the sync. So you can either do it manually. In that case, you have to manually sync the patching schedules with each month's patch Tuesday, or you can automate it using Manage Engine's exclusive patch management solution. Before we discuss or before we demonstrate it, let's understand why. So by syncing the patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesday updates, you can ensure that the patches are tested, approved, and deployed as soon as they are released. And this actually gives you a head start for achieving patch compliance in your networks. Next, always set broad deployment windows for the remote machines and choose non-business hours for the office machines, especially servers. Now, as sysadmins, we know our job is to ensure patch compliance in the networks and keep systems patched as soon as possible after the release, but we definitely don't want to hamper the end users' productivity. So for that, it's better to choose broad deployment windows and to choose non-business hours for critical machines such as servers. And last but not the least, it's always recommended to allow the users to postpone the deployments and reboots. Now, let's say a user or a group of users are in our organization are held up with business critical tasks. Now, how would it sound? How would it feel if if they're forced to deploy patches or they're forced to reboot their systems for patch management process? Now, this actually would be breaking the user productivity if they have to deploy the patches or reboot the systems in the middle of some business critical task. And as admins, we definitely don't want that. So for that, it's always recommended to allow the users with an option to postpone the deployments and the reboots. So with that, we come to the end of the best practices that you can follow for patching in a hybrid network, a hybrid environment. Now, let's take a look at deploying patches and updates using Patch Manager Plus. So if you're using Endpoint Central or Vulnerability Manager Plus, there's no need to be worried as you can still deploy the patches seamlessly because the patching module is the same in all of these three products. For demo, before we proceed to the demo, I would like to tell you all that due to time constraints, this is going to be a very short demo. But in case you want an entire demo of the Patch Manager Plus product or any of our products, you can just drop in your email ID in the chat. Alternatively, you'll also get a demo request button with the feedback form that you could with the feedback form once you close the webinar. So you can subscribe to the demo request with the feedback form. Okay, so let's demonstrate testing of patches. As already mentioned, the first step is to always test the patches in a pilot group of systems before deploying them to production machines. Now, always remember that the pilot group must have all the versions and flavors of all the operating systems that are being used in your network. So let's head on to the Patch Manager Plus console. This is how the Patch Manager Plus console's homepage looks. And we are using the version 10.1 on 2138.2. Here in the homepage, you can find the network patch status along with the system health graph. We have also listed the patches based on their severity and vulnerability. And to the right side of the screen, you can see the latest security news. This latest security news section redirects to the patch management, to the Manage Engine's community posts, as well as Manage Engine blogs. This is the Patch Tuesday forum post, wherein you will get all the information regarding the updates based on this month's Patch Tuesday. So coming back to the product. So we're talking about the testing of patches. So let's demonstrate how to test patches using in a custom environment using Patch Manager Plus. We'll click on deployment from the top menu and let's click on test and improve from the left pane. So here you can see all the test groups that have already been created. Let's go ahead and create a new test group. Click on add group. Now the first task is to choose the platform. So as you can see, we offer three different platforms for patch management, that is Windows, Mac, and Linux. For demo, let's go with Windows. Next, we'll have to choose a custom group. You can already choose a custom group that has been created, or you can create a new custom. I'll create a new custom group by clicking on Create Custom Groups. And once the window loads, you can see the custom groups that have already been created. Let's create a new group. I'll be naming it PT Oct. Let's choose Oct. Okay. Next is to choose the category. Now, what does these three different categories mean? Static, static, unique, and dynamic. Now, for a custom group, that is a test group, always ensure that the group category is either static or static unique and never dynamic. Now, what happens if we choose a dynamic test group? I'll click on dynamic and let's see what happens. So you can see that a dynamic custom group is based on a set of criteria. Let's choose a criteria going with operating system equals and choose my favorite Windows 10. What does this mean? So this essentially means that the PTOC 2022 custom group that we have created is a dynamic in nature and is based on the criteria that operating systems equals to Microsoft Windows 10 will be in this group. So this means that any Windows 10 system that gets added to the network will automatically be made a part of this custom group. And frankly speaking, for our test groups, we definitely don't want that to happen. So we'll stick with either static or static unit. Going with static. Now the next step is to just import the Windows machines here. You can easily import by clicking on the machines needed in the left pane, and you can see on the right pane, the machines are being imported. And now we click on save. And we can see that our custom group, that is our PTOC 2022 test group, has been created successfully. So we are talking about testing and approval feature. Coming back to it. Okay, let's create a new test group. Now that we have already created a group, let's select it. PT. There it is, PTOC 2022. Okay. Now the next step is to choose the deployment option. So you can see we offer Microsoft updates, third-party updates, antivirus updates, as well as driver updates. These updates need to be chosen based on their severity. We'll go with critical and important. For demo, obviously you can go as per your organization's needs. Here we have the option to patch all the applications, or you can choose to patch specific applications by clicking on this checkbox, clicking on this radio button, and then selecting the applications from the drop down. Or you can choose to patch all the applications except a few, which you can choose right from this drop down. We'll go with patching all applications. For the third-party updates, let's select based on their severities. We also offer antivirus updates. You can see a list of the antivirus updates that we offer for patch management right here. And you can also choose to update your drivers. Now, the next step is to choose the deployment criteria. Now, you can choose to deploy the patches after n number of days from vendor release. So if I go with 2, this means that I choose to deploy the patches after 2 days from vendor release. Now, the step that follows is the choosing of the deployment policy. You can create or modify a new policy here, or you can choose one that has already been created from the drop-down menu. Let's go with a pre-built one. Next, we have the notification settings. Do note that this is an optional setting, but in case you want notifications regarding the testing and approval feature, you can just enable it and you can put in your email ID. Let's go with a random email ID for now. Also, if you have already configured the Patch Manager Plus mobile application, which is available on Google Play Store as well as App Store, that is for both Android and iOS devices, you can just select the technician right from here, and the mobile application for the selected technician will notify him about the tested patches. Now we come to the last step, that is the approval mode for tested patches. So if you want the tested patches to be automatically approved after n number of days, all you have to do is click on the checkbox and put in the number of days. If I put in 2, this means I have automatically chosen to approve the tested patches after 2 days. You click on create, and we can see that our test group has been created successfully. This is PT-Org 2020. Let's head back to the console, the presentation again. Now let's talk about another feature, another exclusive feature of ManageEngine's patch management solution, Patch Manager Plus, that is the automated patch deployment feature. Again, I would like to repeat that due to time constraints, this demo is going to be very short, ladies and gentlemen. But in case you want a customized demo for our products, you can just drop in your email ID in the chat, or you can click on the demo request button that you'll be getting once you close the webinar with the feedback form. Okay, so here, while demonstrating the automate patch deployment tasks, we'll also be demonstrating the based on patch usage split. So to create an automated patch deployment task, we click on deployment, and then we'll click on automate patch deployment from the left pane. Now, before I begin, I'll tell you that creation of an automated patch deployment task is a two-step process. The first step is to create a deployment policy. And the second last step is to associate an automate patch deployment task with the deployment policy. So let's create a new deployment policy at first. We'll create a new policy by clicking on create policy. Let's rename it to PT. Add in a description if you want. We'll click on save. Now the first task is to choose the weekly split type. So what are the differences between the regular split and the based on patch use split? So if you click on the regular split, you'll see that the weeks are listed as first, second, third, fourth, and last. You can choose the weeks of the month as well as the days. You can put in the deployment time. I'd like to keep it as broad as possible. And add more than one schedules by clicking on add more schedules. Now let's talk about the based on patched user split. So this is ManageEngine's exclusive based on patched user split, wherein the weeks have been listed based on the patch Tuesday. So we'll keep the first patched user week for testing and approval, and we'll start deployment from the first, second, and third week. That is after the patched user week. We'll be choosing the dates right here, and we'll specify the deployment window. Now the next step is to choose the downloading of patches from the server to agent. You can choose to download the patches from the server to the agent either during the deployment window or anytime the agent contacts the server. But do note that the deployment will happen based on this specified schedule, irrespective of this option chosen. The last step is to choose the initiation of deployment. The deployment can be initiated either at the system startup or the 90-minute refresh cycle, or either of these, whichever happens earlier. We'll click on save and continue, and we'll come to the second step, that is the pre-deployment activities. Now, let's say you want certain activities to be performed on your endpoints before the deployment happens. So for that, we have our exclusive pre-deployment activities, wherein you can choose to wake the systems connected to LAN before deployment. You can choose to deploy, you can choose to reboot the systems before the deployment with pre-deployment reboot option, or you can also choose a custom option using our custom script. We offer this exclusive custom script feature wherein custom actions can be performed on the endpoints in the network before deployment. Let's say you have a virtual machine and you want to save the configurations before the deployment happens. So for that, we can create a custom script and add it to the script repository. Now in the pre-deployment activities, all you have to do is simply choose the custom script, add the script arguments, the respective deploy dependency files, and then save and continue. Let's now go with pre-deployment reboot for now. You can see that we can choose to skip reboot for certain machines for as well as servers. And if you want to notify the users about the reboot that's going to happen, you can enable the checkbox and put in a custom message. Once you save it, we come to the pre-deployment user notification. So if you want the users to be notified about the patch deployment, you can click on the checkbox and configure the message. You can also choose the notifications timeout. For users, if you want to allow the users to skip the deployment, you can just click on the checkbox. And in case you want the deployment progress to be shown on the user's systems, that is the client systems, just click here. Saving and continuing, and we come to the last, that is the post-deployment activities. So as the name suggests, post-deployment activities are the activities that you want to be performed on the endpoints after the deployment has happened. You can either choose to reboot or shut down the systems, or you can choose our exclusive custom scripts option, wherein let's see you have chosen to end an application, terminate an application before deployment. And once the deployment has happened, you would like to restart it. You can just create a script for it, add it to the script repository, and then configure it by importing it right here. Let's go with post reboot or shutdown. Here you can see that you can either choose to force reboot using Patch Manager Plus, or you can delay the reboot. You can also add notifications, and if you want to skip the reboot for servers or for machines that don't require it, you can configure them just by clicking on the checkboxes. Click on save, and we see here's a gist of the deployment policy details. We have the name here, PTOCTP, along with the deployment schedule, pre-deployment, and post-deployment settings. Click on save and continue. And so our deployment policy has been created. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that creation of an automated patch deployment task is a two-step process. First, you have to create or modify a deployment policy. Next, you have to associate an automate patch deployment task to it. Let's associate an automate patch deployment task. We'll choose Windows. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any doubts about the product demonstration, I would like to tell you that since we have time constraints, this will be a very short demo, but you can opt for a demo request either by putting in your email IDs in the chat, or you can also click on the demo request button that you'll be getting with the feedback form once you close the webinar. So now let's associate our deployment policy with an automated patch deployment task. Let's name it as the APD. You can choose the updates and severity updates based on their severities, or Microsoft updates going for third-party updates. Here's a list of the antivirus updates that we already support. And then now the next step is to choose the deployment option. That is, you can choose to deploy the patches after n number of days from either release or from approval. So if I put in 3, I choose to deploy the patches after 3 days from approval. That being said, we'll click on next. Now the next step is to choose the deployment policy. So we have already created a deployment policy, that's PT. Let's search for our policy. I believe it was called PTOCT 2022. Yeah, Okay, PTOC DB. Got right. So we have selected our policy, and here's a gist of it. Now here we have a suspension option. Now what do we use it for? So let's say you create an automate patch deployment task for your remote users. Now these remote users, that is they're working from home, they have a different time schedule, different connecting schedule. So an automate patch deployment task has been specifically configured for them. But what happens after those remote users return back to the organization? Let's say they come back to the organization after 2-3 months. So in that case, since they come back to the organization, their patching schedules will be followed. If the patching schedules will be maintained as per the organization's rules. So in that case, we don't need the automate patch deployment task. And to prevent the conflict between those two automate patch deployment tasks, all you can do is you can choose to suspend the task. Just click on the checkbox and put in the date wherein you would like the suspension to happen. We'll go with, let's say, December 1st at 21:34. So we choose to suspend this automate patch deployment task on the 12th, on the 1st of December at 21:34. Click on next, and now we choose the target. You can choose the targets right from here. Also, you can filter out targets with the filter button. You can exclude certain targets based on the domain or use IP addresses as well as computers or custom groups. The possibilities are endless with managing this patch management solutions. And the last step is to choose the notifications. Now you can choose to trigger notifications regarding the automate patch deployment task. That's the download or deployment failure. To configure it, just click on the checkbox and you can put in the then number of hours after which you'd like to be notified. We offer detailed reporting of these failures or downloads in 3 different formats, that is PDF, XLSX, and CSV. You can attach them along with the mails. You can also choose to be notified about the deployment status by putting in your email ID here. And as again, if you have already configured the Patch Manager Plus mobile application, which is available on Android, that is on Google Play Store for Android and App Store for Apple. For iOS, you can just select the technicians, configure the technicians from right here, and the technicians would be notified about the APD on their mobile apps. So we click on save, and we can see that our automate patch deployment task has been created successfully. So to quickly summarize, the creation of an automated patch deployment task can be done in very simple 4 easy steps. That is, first, we have to choose the applications based on their severities, that is critical or moderate or low. Next, we have to choose the deployment policy. For the deployment policy, you can either go with the regular split or the manage engines exclusive patch Tuesday split. Number third, you can choose to define the targets, and also you can exclude certain targets based on computers' IP addresses as well as organizational units or domains. Lastly, you can configure the notifications, and in case you want detailed reports to be attached to the notifications, you can just choose the required format. And it's done. Now let's talk about another feature that our patch management solutions offer, that is filtering out the updates. Let's come back to the console. We'll click on patches from the top menu and we'll select a view. Now let's say in the latest patches, you want to know which patches were released on the date of patch Tuesday, that is 11th of October 2020. So how do we do that? It's very simple. We'll click on filters and we'll click on the plus button. You can save the filter if you want. Let's go with release date is, and we'll choose the custom date, that is the date of the patch Tuesday, I believe, which was on 11th of October, the patches were released. You click on apply, and once the filter gets added, you can see the patches that were released on the 11th of October. You can also use this filter to look for download status, approved time, patch, and uninstallation in various views, starting from the missing patches, applicable patches, supported patches, and so on. Now, many a time, ladies and gentlemen, there happens the need to decline certain applications. Let's say you don't want to deploy less critical patches to your machines, but if you choose to ignore them, it will end up affecting the system health compliance. Also, certain applications running on other software such as Java might be unsupported with the latest updated version. So what do we do for scenarios like this? Now, in cases like this, Manage Engine's patch management solutions bring the exclusive decline patches feature. So what is this declining of patches feature? Let's go ahead to the console. We'll click on decline patches from the left pane. So here are the custom groups that have already been created to decline patches. Let's create a new group. First, we have to choose a custom group wherein we would like certain patches to be declined. I'll go with the pre-built one. Let's go with this. You can put in a description if you want. The next task is to choose the patches. So as you can see here, we allow declining of patches, applications, as well as entire families. I'll just remove some for easier explanation. Okay. So let's go ahead and choose patches to decline. First up, we'll choose some patches, going with random ones. Hope you don't do for your organization. Next, we'll choose some applications. We already have some applications here that are for declining. Let's go with Adobe, Microsoft Silverlight 5, and VLC. We also allow declining of entire families of applications. You can do that easily by clicking here and choosing the required families. And once added, now click on next and we can see a summary that we have declined 3 patches and 5 families for Windows and 6 applications for Mac. Now we click on save and we can see that our declined patches feature has been created successfully with the custom groups that are declining the required patches. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any queries or questions regarding the webinar or the presentation, please feel free to ask via chat. Also, since this was a short demo due to time constraints, if you want a customized demo of the product, please feel free to drop in your email ID in the chat. Also, you can get a demo request button once you close the webinar in the feedback form. You can just sign up for the demo right there. Going back to the presentation. So as you can see on your screen, these are the solutions that Manage Engine offers for seamless patch management. We have our flagship product, Endpoint Central, which is a unified endpoint management and security solution. Here we also have an MSP version of it. We have Patch Connect Plus that smoothly integrates with SCCM and Intune to ensure third-party patching. You can use Vulnerability Manager Plus to scan and mitigate vulnerabilities and compliance issues in your network. And lastly, we have Patch Manager Plus, our standalone patch management solution to ensure seamless patching across the network. Now, dear folks, we'll be taking questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask via chat. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask questions via chat if you have any. Also, due to the bulk of questions we have been receiving, in case we miss out your question, in case we miss out answering your question, please be assured that we'll be answering your questions via mail in 1 to 2 working days. So we have a question from Advent Hospital. It says, if I remove a declined patches from a group, will it appear back in missing patches? So I'd like to tell everyone that if you decline a patch, this would not appear in the missing patches. So one benefit of declining patches is that you can seamlessly have a system health compliance by removing that patch, that is by declining that patch, and this will never appear back in the missing patches list. So we have a question from Mr. Sheikh Afroz. He says, I would like to know the discussed patch manager plus options will work in desktop central version also. So first of all, I would like to let all of you know that we have renamed desktop central to endpoint central. And number two, yes, all of the patch manager plus options that have been demonstrated are available in endpoint central, that is desktop central formerly. So you can get all of this. The patching is a module in Endpoint Central. Along with patching, we have vulnerability detection, RMM, and a plethora of other features in Endpoint Central. So if you want a demo of Endpoint Central, you can always drop in your email ID and mention the name of the product for which you want the demo. Ladies and gentlemen, so if you want a demo of any product, you can just drop in your email IDs in the chat and mention the name of the products. Also kindly note that this webinar has been recorded and the recording will be sent to your registered email IDs along with the presentation's slide deck in 1 to 2 working days. You can also get a copy of this webinar's recording from Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday page within 1 to 2 working days. Dear folks, we'll be closing the webinar in a few minutes. So if you have any queries, please feel free to ask via chat. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of this session. I would like to grab this opportunity to thank you all for being such a lovely audience. Now, we would highly appreciate if you could rate the webinar from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. So once you close the meeting, you'll have a webinar meeting feedback where you can rate it from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. And also due to time constraints, since this was a very short demo, if you want a proper demo, please feel free to drop your email IDs via chat. Thank you again. Thank you for visiting. See you all next month.